This is my 6th try at this. This is a tough one. Because clearly, there's a problem with the NHL, and the fans have absolutely no interest in seeing it get cleaned up. I'm old enough to have known people who have gone through drug overdoses. I am old enough to have known people that drugs ruined their lives. There's a hockey player that we were all talking about, I think it was about a year ago, Joe Murphy, where he ended up homeless. And concussions caused him to have issues. And he ended up abusing drugs, which included cocaine. And the NHL knows it has a problem, but it won't publicly say it. So Bill Daly, 4 years ago, the most recent thing I could find from Bill Daly on it is that he was alarmed at the amount of positive tests they were seeing for cocaine, which was not a banned substance. But he said if it's more than 20 players in the National Hockey League using cocaine, he'd be shocked. That is an absolutely ridiculous statement being made by a league that continues to deny it ever has a problem. When steroids were dominating the news in football and in baseball, hockey came out and went, it's not of any of our players. No, we test them. None of our players have a problem, which is patently ridiculous. It's ridiculous. At the time, I kind of went, yeah, hockey players wouldn't do that. Because I wasn't really thinking about it. But for a player coming back from injury, it makes sense. You don't want to lose your spot in the lineup. Drugs, it can help you heal and probably make you a little bit stronger too. The fact that we have a league that goes, well, we don't know that head injuries cause any kind of long-term health effects. And at the same time it goes, oh, if it's a recreational drug, we don't care that it's illegal. It's not really our problem. This isn't about the war on drugs. It's not. Not in the slightest. It's about a league where players are going, okay, what drug can we get away with? Which is basically the idea. And they go, Coke. They don't care if we're on it. They don't care. And there's been an emerging crisis, and there are numerous different sources I've found on this. There's an emerging crisis with this in the National Hockey League, where players are using a lot of drugs. And for all these people, are like, it doesn't matter until there's an overdose. Until there's an overdose. Because what we know is probably a very small part of what's actually going on. And we don't know where it stops. We don't know what kind of people that puts them in contact with, and all of this other wonderful stuff. And there's plenty of people I've known that, just people I've known in my own personal life and people I've known through work that if cocaine is a drug of choice, they likely have tried, or they also use crystal meth. And that's life-destroying. I've seen it. I see it every now and then locally. You'll see somebody in the, just walking around, and you'll go, that's a person who's a drug abuser. You can see it. You can see the physical effects. The National Hockey League as an employer can absolutely put in a clause where they say these drugs are prohibited. And that would help. For a player who's making $2, $3, $4 million a year to know, if I do that, I may not make $4 million next year. It's a good deterrent. But, again, I think in part and parcel, the drug problem we're starting to see with National Hockey League players, part of that is going to be because of pain from an 82-game schedule. Part of it is going to be because, well, we're not allowed to use these other things because the NHL tests that. So we're going to go to this instead. I remember the Grant Fuhr suspension. I remember them saying, yeah, he's not coming back till he's clean. And now we're in a league where, for the most part, they've kind of just turned a blind eye. Like, oh, that's fine. As long as you don't test positive for that tiny little bit of a PED, we don't care. We don't care. But it's ridiculous, and the reason that I mentioned the Austin Watson situation this morning is this. It was a horrible situation for Watson, but it was a domestic dispute that it would appear that both parties were equally involved in. And now it's gone away. And yet, Austin Watson will never shake that reputation. Ever. Never. So he will never shake the reputation as being a horrible domestic abuser. Which I don't think is fair either. I don't. Does that mean I think he's a great guy? No. So when I see people saying, well, he's a jerk in high school. Yeah, a lot of people were jerks in high school. But one doesn't necessarily mean the other. There are also some people who were very popular in high school who may turn out to be horrible people behind closed doors towards their own family. The NHL doesn't have to dictate morality. And I'm not saying that they should. But it's got a problem. And it starts with the rules on the ice, and it continues into the rules off the ice. And I don't want to wake up someday and hear that a current National Hockey League player is overdosed. And I really don't want to hear about more former NHL players being homeless after making millions of dollars in the National Hockey League. And I don't want to hear about more hockey players being dead. And there's been a lot of that. So when I see people saying, well, I don't really care, then, you know, we can't then have people feeling bad about the Joe Murphy situation, because it should be an extension of that. If we don't care what they're doing now as players, well, we don't really care about after their career either. Yeah, whatever, it's fine. And then they're just basically just hired guns, and nobody cares about them as people. And I care about hockey players as people. I absolutely do, because they're people. Like I had on my Instagram, I actually had a request to be followed by an actual National Hockey League, former National Hockey League player a few days ago. And I was kind of giddy about it. I was kind of like, holy crap. He's not in the National Hockey League now. Didn't play a ton of games in the National Hockey League. But it was really him. I was like, holy crap, this is so cool. Because again, you know, hockey is a tight-knit community. And I feel like the NHL as a whole is behind the times. And they're treating players like they're just the hired guns. And then as soon as your career's done with, yeah, well, we don't care. I've got health problems after my career's over. We don't really care. It's not really our problem. You really should have thought of that before you laced up your skates. I can't get there. I can't get there where I say, you know, there shouldn't be any consequences for what a player does off the ice. I can't get to we shouldn't really care what a player's doing in their off time because it doesn't matter, because there's been too many instances where a player has a problem and it would be apparent, but we're not doing anything to address the symptoms when they're there. So my anger with Kuznetsov comes out of the fact that, you know, when in May he should have said, yeah, I have a problem. He could have avoided the tests and the double IHF. The double IHF banning doesn't happen if he doesn't get tested. So if he'd come out and said, yeah, I have a problem before he gets tested, right? And then just step away from the national team, and then no harm, no foul. But, you know, he came out and vehemently denied. And that's the other part of it, too, is if it's fine and if nobody cares, why deny it, right? So if it's not something wrong, you're not going to deny it. It's not going to be like, hey, were you at the pool the other day? No, and then you find out I was. You're going to be like, wait, why was he lying about being at the pool? Like, that's really weird. But yeah, if it's something that's technically illegal, I find it really, really strange. It has nothing to do with the war on drugs. You can get fired from a job for testing positive for banned substances. That's just the way that works. The NHL doesn't have cocaine as a banned substance. The NHLPA itself has said they should. The NHL has not moved on it. I'll end on this. The NHL was very arrogant in the way that it talked about things when Major League Baseball was going through the steroid epidemic. That none of our players do that. We don't have a problem. See, we're kind of the message of, well, we're better than baseball players. But with everything that's happened since, I would be very surprised, honestly, if there aren't players who use them to get into shape and to get stronger. And there's masking drugs. There are plenty of masking drugs out there that get used, and those change all the time to try to stay ahead of the tests. So I would be very surprised if there aren't players, either older players trying to stay in the game longer, which is what a lot of the baseball was. And in baseball, too, it was usually your home run hitter that wanted that little bit more power to get that over the fence. So I would be thinking maybe a guy who's scoring a lot of goals all of a sudden. Like, I'm not talking about, like, because I remember with baseball, when all that happened, I remember certain players, Brian Downing comes to mind, and I know people don't like baseball, they don't want to hear it, but Brian Downing, I remember, he had been kind of a skinny guy his whole career and hitting like 15, 16, 20, 25 home runs. And then all of a sudden later on in his career, he's huge, massive, big, bulky guy. I'm like, okay, that really? He has to be, right? And, you know, that seemed pretty obvious to me. And his power numbers suddenly went up. I think the NHL's problem is really quite simply there's a fan base that doesn't want to do anything about it, and they know. They know the appetite's not there. But on the other side of it, there are advertisers who probably really like the squeaky clean image of NHL hockey players as opposed to basketball and football. People always bring up football like NFL. Yeah, people know what guys in the NFL have done, and it's part of the reason why the NFL gets a lot of backlash. There are a lot of reasons. Yes, there are a lot of reasons. But a big part of that is because you see horrible videos and horrible things players do, and then they go, we're going to give them a 4-game suspension. And you go, really? Seriously? There's a video and you're giving them a 4-game suspension? The NHL, public reputation is really, really important. And that's why I think with what's going on now, this is a watershed moment. If the NHL says, we're not going to do anything, and if you look at the system in place, okay, the substance abuse system that's in place, I don't think it's adequate. I really don't. I think it's something that really needs to be changed, and we got a new collective bargaining agreement coming up next year. I would really hope that they look at changing that. And I would hope that it's the players that spearhead it. Because they have to have veteran, former players that they look at their lives and where they're at, and they say, wow, seriously. There was an incident last week. I didn't do a video on it. Or no, it was earlier this week. Mark Pavlich, who used to be an NHL player, and he was in a domestic case with his neighbor, where he beat his neighbor up pretty bad, and he was thrown in jail for assault. And I think they said it was $250,000 bail or something, but it was pretty vicious. And all I could think was, well, he was in the NHL for a while in the 80s. I wonder if he got concussed, because they didn't really test for that. They didn't really care. I wonder if Mark Pavlich is dealing with some personal demons as a result of, in part, sometimes guys are just jerks, but sometimes you have things happen and it changes your whole brain chemistry. I don't know. We'll see how that turns out as well. Again, I didn't mention a news video because I thought that's kind of salacious. I'm going to leave that out. But in this context, I think it makes sense. Because again, people will say, well, in the 80s, hockey players were doing, we know what they were doing. It was well known what was going on. But I don't think that necessarily means it should be accepted either. So we'll see if the NHL moves on this issue. Because the last thing, like I said, I want is to wake up some morning and turn on my phone and look and go, oh, so-and-so passed away. Overdose. Huh, I gotta do a video on that. That sucks. And that's the problem. And some of the drugs that can get you booted out of the league, I don't think they're really a big deal. I really don't. I look at some of the stuff that's qualified as enhancement, as a performance-enhancing drug, and I go, that really doesn't give them that doesn't give him a big advantage. It really doesn't. But we're told it's a PED, and we go, oh, yeah, no, he's got to go for that. And when the science comes out and they go, actually, this really doesn't give him any kind of an advantage whatsoever. Doesn't matter, it's a PED. Got to know better. Nope. Got to kick him out. I find that strange. But, again, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, as always, because I think this is a big issue. And I think it's something that the NHL is going to be forced to face. And I'm really hoping, and this is the same as the concussion issue, I don't want us to have to discuss this because of a player having passed away. And in the concussion issue, I don't want us to be discussing it because a guy gets concussed and paralyzed on a play that, the NHL should be doing more to at least curb the chance of it happening. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And this isn't a topic I want to talk about very much at all, really, in all honesty. Because it's not fun. But it is something that I don't think the National Hockey League in general is talking about enough. And again, you got to think long-term health. You got to think after hockey. This can't just be it's fine. It's fine. It's partying. I will close with this. I noticed 10 to 15 years ago that certain people that were in my life, clearly alcoholics, really major alcoholics. And when I would kind of, talk about, he went out again last night? Yeah, he's a partier. No, he's an alcoholic. Was what I would think. I wouldn't say it out loud. But at some point in time, alcoholics became partiers. And I'm like, no, he's got a serious problem. Serious problem. But, again, differing opinions and all of that wonderful stuff. And I guess terminology changes. So, whereas we might look at one point at somebody and go, if that person has a drug problem, somebody else will go, guy knows how to party. I tell you, great partier. Be interesting to see if the NHL does anything. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, though. Again, we'll keep it as civil as possible because it's a tough subject. I'll talk to you again soon.